Welcome to Michigan's World War I Centennial News Report for October 2016. I'm your host, Dennis Skupinski. The 24-Hour Trench by Andy Robertshaw. We're going to take a look at what trench life was like during the First World War. Mr. Robertshaw brings a wealth of experience. He's an English military historian, curator, author, and educator. He is best known for his television appearances on programs such as Two Men in a Trench, and he was also the military advisor for the film War Horse. During his career, Mr. Robertshaw worked as a curator-manager for the Royal Logistics Corps Museum in Deepcut and was previously head of education at the National Army Museum in London. The State Report, September 23rd through the 25th at Alpena, Michigan at Alpena Community College, the Historical Society of Michigan held their 142nd annual meeting and state history conference. On Saturday the 24th, Dennis Skupinski from Michigan's World War I Centennial gave a presentation on the Michigan Homefront, Stories from World War I. Also in attendance was author David Rogers from Bay City. He was the author of the G34 Paradox, the story of Dow Chemical during the First World War. The Midwest Regional Report. On Tuesday, September 13th, 2016, the World War I Centennial Commission Upper Midwest Region held a meeting at the Pritzker Military Museum and Library in Chicago, Illinois. In attendance were several national World War I Centennial Commissioners, the Executive Director of the World War I Centennial Commission, Daniel Dayton, also the architect of the World War I Memorial, and we had various state representatives. From the state of Tennessee was Deborah York, Executive Director of the Sergeant York Patriotic Foundation. She's a direct descendant of Sergeant Alvin C. York, World War I hero from the 82nd Division.
Welcome to the World War I Centennial Upper Midwest Regional Meeting. I represent the World War I Centennial Commission founding sponsor, the Pritzker Military Museum and Library in Chicago, as the World War I Project Manager. My name is Susan Menegay. It is my great honor to serve as a support for the commemoration of the Great War through the grassroots commemorative efforts of the work being done in the states, which comprise the Upper Midwest region. Those states are Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Michigan, Minnesota, North and South Dakota, Ohio, Tennessee, and Wisconsin. Today I will be presenting on behalf of Minnesota and Kentucky, and North and South Dakota are in the final stages of developing their state's commemorative organization, and I have no doubt they will be joining us here next year.
1 century ago, October 1916. On October 5, 1916, Corporal Adolf Hitler was wounded in the left thigh by an artillery shell at the Battle of the Somme. October 7, 1916, Georgia Tech beat Cumberland College 222-0. This was the most lopsided college football game in history. Georgia Tech was coached by football great John Heisman. On October 8, 1916, German submarine U-53 captures and destroys 5 ships outside of Newport, Rhode Island. On October 16, 1916, activist Margaret Sanger opens the first birth control clinic in Brooklyn, New York. She was arrested on October 26 under the charges of obscenity. Also on October 16, 1916, T.E. Lawrence, a British Army officer, lands at Jeddah with the British mission from Cairo. He would be later known as Lawrence of Arabia. On October 24, 1916, the French forces reopened the offensive phase for the battle at Verdun. They recaptured Fort Douaumont. On October 26, 1916, the first German naval destroyer raid on the Dover Straits commenced. This became known as the Battle of the Dover Strait. On October 28, 1916, the British hospital ship Gallica was sunk by a mine off the French coast near Le Havre, France. On October 29, 1916, Hussein, the Sharif of Mecca, was proclaimed King of the Arab forces. On October 31, 1916, the Ninth Battle of the Isonzo begins and lasts for 5 days on the Italian front. "24-Hour Trench" by Andy Robertshaw. Thousands of men ate, slept, lived, fought, and died in the miles of trenches that stretched across the Western Front in World War I. In the 21st century, it is difficult for us to imagine the horror of daily life there, but the trench experience may help us get the feel for just that. Historian Andy Robertshaw created a First World War trench built by historians and archaeologists to exact specifications. The trench is known as Hill 60. Enjoy the 24-hour trench experience.
Apology, my voice is a bit wrecked. It will get better as the evening goes on, believe me. I'm talking about ground warfare. I'm a complete fraud. My father was in the Royal Navy in the Second World War, served actually in the Pacific, and was in Pearl Harbor on the 4th anniversary of the attack on a training carrier. My grandfather was John Andrew Robertshaw, served between 1916 and 1919, wounded 3 times. And a year and a half ago, I was running a battlefield tour for American people who were very keen on cycling. And we were cycling around the Western Front. I wasn't, I drive. Bill Blaine III, over a drink in the evening, said to me, "I wonder if you can help me with my grandfather, who was in the American Army in the First World War." And I said, "Probably not. But tell me what he did." He said he was a surgeon. That's great. And but before he was in the American Army, he served as a volunteer with you Brits. He didn't say that, but he got the idea. It was at the number 3 stationary hospital. And I said, "Lakeside American Hospital in Rouen." He went, "Yeah, how do you know that?" I said, "Because that's the hospital that saved my grandfather's life on the 20th of August, 1917. He got his phone out and he phoned his wife and he said, "Can you get my granddad's diary out?" What was he doing on the 20th of August, 1917? He was supervising a surgeon. So I bought him a beer.
At least one.
Just one.
At least one.
Oh, come on, I'm not mad. The important thing is that what I want to do tonight is to make you think. I'm looking at trench warfare from arguably a British perspective, but only because the example is British. I am somebody who's had the opportunity to work for various people, including quite a famous American, a guy called Steven Spielberg. And I worked for him on the movie War Horse. I did not play a horse's rear end, okay? I was in it as advisor. I also appear in the film, blowing a whistle and sending guys over the top. But when I arrived on the location for the trenches, I said, "What have you done?" And they, "What do you mean, what have we done?" I said, "Well, you've got shell holes full of water, you've got shattered trees, you've got rain pouring down." And they went, "Yeah, it's the First World War." I went, "The battle they're showing happened in August 1918 on a chalk landscape in blistering sunshine." They went, "Yeah, but if we don't show it with rain and shell holes, no one will know which war it is." Things I said at the time was I would like to try and challenge the preconception that every day on the Western Front was the same. I'm going to start off with a very, very, very controversial point. You see, over there we've got 4 people. Over here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Slightly wrong. Actually, you 2 are over there, but don't move. 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Perfect. You are the infantry. whether it's the American Expeditionary Force or the BEF, the British Expeditionary Force. You're not. You're not infantry. Therefore, you're the guys with the rifles and the machine guns who may go in the trenches. You lot, your gunners, your artillery, your engineers, your Army Service Corps, and you, sir, are everything from the massage corps, don't ask what they do, through to the pay corps. That's what you do, okay? And believe me, sir, you will never ever be asked to sharpen a pencil up and go kill a Hun with it. You don't do that. And you in charge of horses, and you in charge of trucks, and you in charge, in this case, of the railroad, never ever do that. And my gunners never go in the trenches. You do. And yet we have it in our mind that everybody in the First War, as it becomes on the 3rd of September 1939, until then it was the Great War, yeah, because they're coming, no, but you will rotate through the trenches. You do not spend all your time there. In fact, at any one time, you two are frontline trenches. You two are in support. You three are doing everything from queuing up outside a house with a red light. I don't know what they do there, but that's where you go. Or watching a Charlie Chaplin film, or doing a bit of shopping, retail therapy. So actually, there are as many people queuing up outside a house, displaying a red light, or going shopping, as there is in the frontline trenches. And yet, every single movie you will see will ignore what you do, because that's a bit embarrassing. Ignore what you do, because that's not exciting at all. Will probably ignore the gunners. Will certainly ignore you, because the pay corps, let's face it, it's not sexy. Sexy. I cannot see Steven Spielberg saying, basically, the Great War and quadratic equations, it's not going to work, it's not going to sell. Therefore, we end up seeing a fraction of the war. And that fraction of the war is as follows. 1, it's always raining. Even in Britain, and believe me, I live in Britain, it doesn't always rain. It doesn't always rain in France and Belgium. It can do. It certainly doesn't rain in August, by the way. The next thing is, the First World War was not experienced in black and white. It happened in colour. We happen to see the images in black and white, and we assume it actually is in black and white. It's not. I interviewed a veteran. He was an old soldier, as I've said. I was 14 and the year was 1970. Do the math on that, you can work out how old I am. I came home from school, I went over the road and I sat down and I got out. Audience, most of you know what I'm talking about. You probably went to the back. We got a thing out called a cassette recorder. Do you remember those? Record play. I put it out and I said to him, what was it like on the Somme or in the trenches? And he said, I grew up in Suffolk, in East Anglia, and boys meant nicely, I think. Turn that off. I'll tell you something about the war you can't imagine. Well, I'd read all the small dogs and a horse up a tree. So I thought, whatever you say, old man, you're not going to shock me. And he said, I remember it in colour. We remember it in black and white because that's what we see. And what I'm going to try and do tonight is give you a little bit of colour to the board stiff. 9% board stiff. My apologies. 90% board stiff. 9% frozen stiff. 1% scared stiff. And I think that what we see in the world of movies and TVs is the 1% of the war. Now, I've already said that my grandfather served in the First World War. He served between 1916 and 1919. He was in action during that time on about 5 major occasions. Wounded 3 times. I've done some math on how long he spent in combat. It's about 5 days. Over about 1,000 days of experience. So if I was to make a movie about my granddad and ignore everything other than the 5 days, it would be slightly distorting. He was in the trenches for about 100 days. He was in the frontline trenches for about 50 days. Actually fighting, I think about a minute and a half. And yet that's not what we think about, does it? We think about everybody going over the top in the pouring rain, and they are definitely going to die. And by the way, just to put that in perspective, I asked a group of young people the other day what percentage of soldiers would die in the British Army, British and Canadian actually, and they went, 80%, 70%, 60%, 90%. It's actually 11.2% of our soldiers came home from the First World War. So what I'm going to try and do now is to look at this. And this is my starting point for trench warfare. And it's a manual which goes through the routine of soldiers in the trenches. And why did I end up doing this? It's because when I ran a museum, I was working with a department developing an exhibit. And the exhibit was going to look at 24 hours in a trench. And whenever I discussed it with my PR people, they went, oh, it's boring, isn't it? Yeah, it's boring. Could you make it more exciting? What would you want? Could we have a trench raid? Oh, and you could do, but that's not typical. Could we have a gas attack? It's even less typical. How about a big battle? We're doing 24 hours in a trench. We're not doing a battle. We never did it. But when I worked for Mr. Spielberg, when the movie was all over, the prop department said to me, would you like some props from the trenches? And I said yes. 3 truckloads later, I could build a trench. Because that's what I said to do. And because I'd had this experience of people imagining what trench warfare was like, I thought I would, next plug, do the book. And what we get here is the routine for a day. I won't labour the points, but it starts with stand 2. Stand 2 is roughly half an hour before dawn. This morning, probably about 6:30 in the morning for you. You stand 2, every man head and shoulders above the trench so you can see what's happening. As it gets lighter, you drop down into the trench. You then put 1 man in 10 on guard duty. Everybody else, then if you're British, has a rum ration. Good idea actually if we've got a bad throat. Then you have your breakfast, which you cook yourself. Then you clean up, then you're inspected, make sure you've got all your kits. Then you do your morning routine. Then you have your dinner, as we Brits call it. You cook that yourself or it's brought up. Then in the afternoon, you sleep. Not obviously 1 man in 10's on guard duty, but you sleep. So the trenches in the afternoon, it's sleeping boys' time. Then you come round to what we call tea time, and you have your tea. Then it gets dark, but before it gets dark, you stand 2. And now you stand 2 with head and shoulders below the trench until it's fully dark, then you're above the trench. And then you're divided into 3s. 1 man on guard duty for 1 hour. 1 man resting for 1 hour. 1 man working for 1 hour. And that's your routine all night until next morning when you carry on. And the number of people who said, oh, were the men woken up to go on guard duty in the morning? No, they're already awake because they're working all night. Bad weather, 48 hours to 3 days. That's it. Because you're not going to be any good. Why? Because if you're sleeping in the afternoon and you're doing that with guard duty, you're probably getting between 4 and 5 hours sleep a day. And you will know at the end of 5 days, you might as well not be there. And the army isn't stupid. They want you to be efficient and they want you to stay alive because curiously, they need you to do the job. So let's go through this. Let's go through what we're talking about, the trenches. And should the officer who has this be captured or killed, we don't want to give away too much information. So this is a notional front line. And by the way, the expression blue on blue comes from the First World War. because our friendly forces are marked in blue and the enemy are marked in red. But this is a tractor down the walls, giving us the term battery. And the lowest rank in the British Army for the Royal Engineers is a sapper, because they dig S-shaped saps to get close to the enemy. And for those people that don't know, the front of a trench, the bit that faces the enemy, that bit there, is called the parapet. Paratet covers your head. The back of the trench is called the parados. It covers your back. And this is a diagram from 1917 showing a perfect trench. And here, in fact, we have how to dig that trench. Bearing in mind, by the way, this would have been done in the dark. I did it rather simply. I actually used a gang mower to clean an area of pasture next to my house. I then borrowed, and they were on R&R. They wanted to do something different from being shot at by anti-Afghan forces. You got the idea. And they spent 5 days working with me, and I'm going to admit this, a backhoe. I am a purist, but I'm not a sadist. So what we did is we cheated slightly. And this is a piece of trench, excavated a trench which you can walk down without the enemy seeing you, because otherwise they shoot you and it spoils your day. If we then revet it, we add wrinkly tin, mate, if you have to, but the fact is you fill sandbags with local material. And here where I am, and the reason I chose railway wood is the geology is identical to northern Belgium. It's clay. And that clay in summer is like concrete. And in winter, it has all the consistency of jello. I cannot kid you. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. No trench other than a training camp in the US or Canada or the UK ever looked like that. So what I did is I walked away and left it for 6 months, because I knew it would become more authentic. I was not prepared for how authentic it would become. But what I then did was I decided that I would concentrate on what soldiers actually need to function in the trenches. And one of the things that I do is I recover with a team human remains. And I know that although the manifests tell you what a soldier carries, the reality is quite different. So what I decided to do was to recreate it. And I at the time was working for the army, and I was able to borrow from my local training depot a soldier who was a little shy, I must admit, about wearing First World War underwear. But here he is. German soldiers were given a round disc, and they said they were no better than chained dogs, hence dog tags. We call them ID tags. And I remember my old soldier saying to me, he told me that one of the things that you do in the trenches is before you go in, you take every single match out of your matchbox. You melt some candle wax in a tin, and you dip the head of every match in the candle wax. You then take a sandbag and you cut it into strips, and you soak the candle wax in the sandbag in the candle wax. And when you're ready, you go into action with it in your pockets. It's your fire lighter. It will light even if everything else is wet. And if you want a nice hot cup of tea, something personally I can't stand, but British soldiers like, was doing archaeology, what had caused this damage, I would have said shell fire. It's actually stuff called gravity, invented by a man called Isaac Newton, I think. The fact is, it's mud and rain and frost and weight. It simply collapsed. And what we then did is we bailed it out. We cleared it as best we could, and we built a complete dugout, probably about 1/8 the size of this room, but deep enough to be used. We also then built a bridge as a bit of shelter. And very importantly, I brought in some friends to help me. This guy here, looking a bit grumpy, wearing leather boots, puttees, tunic, leather jerkin, leather equipments. I have to confess, I had not realised at the time, actually is vegan, so he found it a little challenging. And this is the group. Basically, is we sent them into the trench in daylight. In reality, they would have gone in the dark to replace the outgoing garrison after done their 5-day stints. But frankly, I realised this wasn't real. This was a simulation. It's an experiment. It's experimental archaeology. We gave them an officer, much to their great disgust. They didn't before we started. And you're thinking, well, come on. Does it matter if they're friends? Yes, it does. No soldier in the British Army ever went over the top thinking, I really, really think George V's a great guy. Or went over the top thinking, I really hate the Kaiser, who he'd never met. He went over the top into action because Fred and Jack and Bert were with him. It's about comradeship, and I needed to create very rapidly this idea. Some of you may well know that when Spielberg did Band of Brothers, he actually did a boot camp for all of the actors to try and get the idea across. Anybody in the room that served will know just how important that actually is. Just off the flight line to Gatwick Airport, and I can feel people going, ah, interesting. And how did the people at Gatwick Airport respond to flares and rockets and blank firing? They ignored us completely. I have no idea what you have to do to get the attention of air traffic control in the UK. But obviously flares and rockets and blank firing machine guns does not have any effect on them. Fine. Anyway, the important thing is we also got people to experiment with digging and sandbag filling, because I really have to say health and safety as a concept did not really exist in the First World War, but I had to be aware of somebody presenting to me with a pickaxe in their head was going to look pretty bad when we finished the report. So we made sure they were familiar, and people who were perhaps not quite so good at spatial awareness were told how to avoid injuring their mates and themselves. And was someone get sniped? The reality was the battalion was 900 men strong. They were in the trenches at Ypres, Railway Wood, from the 2nd of January to the 7th of January. During that period, one man cut his hand very badly on wrinkly tin and went back because he had septicemia. You see, we've got in the picture 5 people to support the 10 who were taking part. The ratio is almost perfect between rear areas and combat. It demonstrates that even in a recreation, you need the rear echelon to do all the things you need the rear echelon to do. Without them, nothing is going to happen. It will not work. We've also made some interesting discoveries. You see, when I was working for a Canadian TV crew at a place called Forward Cottage near Ypres, we found a green enamel mug. It was in a trench. And the TV crew said, could you speculate to the camera how that mug got to be there? And I went, what do you mean? And Matt, the director, said, well, do you think the owner died? Do you think he was shot and left it out? I said, I don't know. I'm not going to do it. And they were a bit angry with me for not speculating. When we did the recreation, I gave everybody a combination of white enamel mugs, which is standard for the British Army, and 2 green ones. When they all came out and we basically set up the quartermastery again and got the issues of kit back from everybody, nobody handed back a green enamel mug. And I said, well, why haven't you handed back the green enamel mugs? And the 2 guys who got them went, they're useless. I went, why? And they said, well, in the trenches, in the dark, when the tea came around, everybody had a white mug, went, here's my mug, in the dark, I know where it is. And when the tea was poured, they went, that's it, full. The green ones, you couldn't find them, and when they filled them up, you got your hands scalded. Had I known that, when Matt, the director, had said, can you explain how come that green mug's here in this trench? I would have said a British soldier got sick of it and threw them away.
Reuben, I've been thinking, said his wifey dear. Now that all is peaceful and calm, boys will soon be back on the farm. Mr. Reuben started winking, slowly rubbed his chin. He pulled his chair up close to Mother, and he asked her with a grin, how you gonna keep 'em down on the farm?